The safe door hung wide open. That was the moment I knew the most precious thing my husband left behind was gone. The Gibson Les Paul Standard, 1,959. Frank's second heart was no longer there. And then my son, Evan, told me he'd sold the guitar to pay off his girlfriend's credit card debt and put down a deposit for a Miami trip. $2,500 for what Frank called his soul. I thought my own heart was about to stop. But the next morning, a phone call from a man I never expected to hear from changed everything. He said he had Frank's guitar, and that my husband had left me something I needed to know, a secret he tucked away before he died. My name is Joanne Miller, and I'm 61 years old. I've been a widow for almost 11 months. It sounds calm when I say it out loud, but every time I have to use the word widow to describe myself, it feels like someone pricks my heart with the tip of a needle. Not enough to fell me, but enough to sting sharply. My husband, Frank Miller, was 4 years older than me. A real guitarist in Nashville. Not the TV star kind, but the kind who played bars, studios, and late-night jam sessions in those old live music halls with his longtime buddies. People joked and called him the old Les Paul man, because for decades he dreamed of owning a 1,959 Gibson Les Paul Standard in cherry sunburst, what the guitar world calls the holy grail of guitars. He saved every bit he could. Gig money, payments from teaching beginner kids, extra shifts in studios, everything went into a tiny fund he liked to call his second heart. Because my first heart is you, he'd say, eyes shining, grinning like a boy newly in love. The day Frank finally bought that Les Paul, I remember every detail. It was an October afternoon, a light drizzle outside, leaves scattered across the yard. He carried the guitar case inside like it was a newborn baby, set it on the table, opened the lid, and the yellow lamp spilled over the cherry sunburst body. The whole room felt brighter. "Look, Joe," he whispered. "My whole youth is right here." From that day on, the Les Paul became the soul of our home. Frank kept it locked inside the safe in his music room, the little room at the end of the hall with old posters and cheaper guitars hanging on the walls. He only opened that safe when he needed to record something worthy, or when a very close friend came over, or when he was teaching our son Evan a few basic chords. Evan grew up in the sound of his father's guitar. When he was little, he used to say, "Is greater than, someday I'm gonna be a rocker. I'll wear Dad's Les Paul on stage, and Dad will clap for me from the front row." Frank would laugh until his eyes nearly disappeared, and I'd stand in the kitchen doorway with a ladle in my hand, feeling warm inside like holding a burning coal close to my chest. Then time passed. Evan grew taller, lankier, traded guitar dreams for oversized hoodies and online games. The Les Paul stayed in the safe, silent and sacred Frank's private treasure. Until that morning was just another ordinary Friday. I woke at 6:30, fed the cat, made coffee, turned on the radio for the morning news. Early summer sunlight slid through the blinds, landing on the oak dining table Frank had built himself. Everything was normal to the point of dullness, the kind of dullness you never think you'll miss until it's gone. Suddenly I remembered something Frank said last night. No, not last night, but the night almost a year before he passed, because Frank now lay beneath grass and headstone. Is greater than, "There's a pack of new strings in the safe. If you've got time tomorrow, swap them onto the acoustic, I think it's starting to buzz." After that he coughed lightly, then chuckled and said, "I'm getting old. Even my guitar strings breathe better than my lungs." The memory made me smile. I set down my coffee, slipped on my house shoes, and walked down the hall. The music room sat in the far corner. I opened the door. The smell of old wood and varnish rushed out. The guitars hung still and silent on the walls, like loyal soldiers waiting for their commander. I reached up and flipped on the ceiling light. Warm yellow light swept across the room, and I froze. The safe in the corner, the same safe Frank always locked, key kept in his pocket, opened and closed like a ritual, was wide open. Not cracked, not careless. Wide open. Its dark mouth seemed to smirk at me. I stepped closer, heartbeat thudding like a drumline. In the deepest compartment, where Frank always kept the red velvet case, there was now only an empty space shaped exactly like a guitar's body. The 1,959 Gibson Les Paul was gone. I stood there, hand on the metal edge, nails digging into the paint until my fingertips turned white. No, 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 no. I tore through every compartment, though of course a Les Paul can't crawl somewhere else. The red velvet case was still there, empty. The fabric inside still bore the ghost-shaped imprint where the guitar used to rest. A flood of images blasted through my mind. Frank on the couch, playing Blue Moon of Kentucky past midnight. Little Evan touching the strings for the first time, shaking like he'd found buried treasure. The night before Frank went to the hospital, him opening the safe, placing his hand on the case, whispering, "You wait for me to come home, okay?" My head spun. "Mom?" A voice behind me made me jump. I turned and saw Evan standing in the doorway, hands shoved into his jeans pockets. Behind him stood Mara, his girlfriend, with curled chestnut hair, carefully done makeup, a tight dress, and a glossy leather purse hanging off her shoulder. "What's going on?" Evan asked. "I heard you calling." I realized I'd been unconsciously whispering the words, "No, impossible," over and over. I looked at my son, then at the open safe, then at Mara. There was a strange, suspended moment where everything went silent, so silent I could hear the soft ticking of the old wall clock. "Why? Is the safe open?" I asked, my voice rough. "And where is your father's Les Paul?" Evan froze. His face shifted just slightly, his shoulders tightening. Mara, meanwhile, did the opposite. She smiled sweetly, almost too sweet to be real. "Aunt Joanne, let me explain. I'm talking to my son." I cut her off, my eyes never leaving Evan. "Where is the guitar?" Evan swallowed, his throat rising and falling. "Mom," he began, I sold it." End quote. The words, "sold it," dropped to the floor like a lead weight. I could hear my own heartbeat crashing in my ears. The air grew so heavy I felt like if I breathed too hard, it would shatter. "Say that again." I kept my voice calm, eerily calm. Maybe it was the old nurse in me. The more shocked I was, the quieter I got. "I sold the Les Paul," Evan repeated, a little faster this time, as if rushing to get it over with. "Some collector guy came by, offered $2,500. I needed the money." "Why did you need money exactly?" I asked, eyes fixed on him. Mara stepped forward half a step, placing her hand on Evan's arm, her voice syrupy soft. "It was because of me, Aunt Joanne. I ran into some credit card trouble, and we already put down the deposit for our Miami trip months ago. If we canceled, we'd lose everything. Evan didn't want to worry you, so I didn't ask you." My tone was clipped, but my eyes never left Evan. "You used the spare key to open the safe?" Evan stayed silent long enough for the truth to become obvious, even before he said it. Finally he whispered, "Yes. You knew what that guitar meant to your father," I said slowly, every word deliberate. "You knew he spent his whole life chasing it. You knew he called it his second heart. You knew all of that, and you still opened the safe, carried it out, and handed it to a stranger for $2,500? I haven't dated." Evan's face pinched, like the words had slapped him. "Mom," he stammered, "I'm his son too. I figured, after he passed, the guitar was just a keepsake. Mara needed help. She needed help, so you sold your father's second heart?" My tone wasn't loud, but each word scraped my throat on the way out. Mara slipped in again, her smile fading just a touch, but her voice still sugary. "Aunt Joanne, I understand you're shocked, but a guitar is just an object. Frank would absolutely want his son to put the living first, don't you think? Evan has to think about our future, and the guitar was just an object?" I repeated, my mouth curling. "Then why don't you sell the bag on your shoulder, or that shiny new watch on your wrist? Why don't you sell your things? Why tell my son to sell the one thing his father considered a soul?" Mara flinched, just slightly, but recovered almost instantly. "Aunt Joanne, that bag isn't worth anything compared to the guitar." She gave a small laugh. "And we were really desperate. Miami, credit cards, rent." I suddenly let out a short, brittle laugh. $2,500, I said. "You sold a 1,959 Les Paul Standard Cherry Sunburst for $2,500? Evan nodded, eyes darting away from mine. "Do you have any idea what that guitar is worth on the market?" I asked. He shook his head, mumbling. "I didn't think that far. I just needed the money." Mara shrugged lightly. "It was just sitting in the safe anyway." And we're, you know, alive. I'm sure Frank up in heaven understands. The moment she said Frank's name so casually, like she was mentioning someone from her contacts list, my chest tightened. I turned fully to Evan. You didn't ask me, I said. If I asked, you'd have said no, Evan muttered, cornered. Yes, I nodded. I would have said no. Every single time. Silence settled heavy between us. I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. I only said quietly, "Get out of my music room, both of you. I need to be alone." "I have to, Mom," Evan said softly. I turned away, eyes lifting toward the empty space on the wall where Frank used to hang the Les Paul whenever he cleaned it. "Go," I said. A moment later, I heard their footsteps retreating, the door brushing the frame, then their steps fading down the hallway. And then it was just me, the room full of instruments, and an emptiness so deep I felt like I could fall straight into it and still not fill it. I didn't remember how long I stayed in that music room. At some point I was sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at the open safe. At another moment I had stood up, thinking I should call someone, then stopping myself. I considered calling Ray, Frank's best friend, the one who worked in financial investigations. But then I imagined it. "Hi, Ray. My son just sold my husband's second heart for half the price of an old used car." I also thought about Henry Brooks, the owner of the vintage guitar shop in Franklin, the man who owed Frank a lifelong favor. But what would be the point? The guitar was gone. I didn't even know who had bought it. 2 days drifted by in that hazy, half-alive state. I functioned like a machine, eating, sleeping, showering, tidying small things. But my mind circled the same questions endlessly. What should I have done differently? Was there any way to keep the guitar? Was there? On Sunday morning, I was pouring my third cup of coffee when the landline rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with a Tennessee area code. I picked up, my voice raspy. "Hello, this is Joanne." "Miss Joanne Miller?" A gravelly older male voice, clear despite the age. "This is Henry Brooks. Do you remember me?" My hand tightened around the receiver. "Henry, from Brooks Vintage Guitars?" I asked. "That's right." He gave a soft laugh. "The man Frank saved from bankruptcy back in 2004. I owe him my whole life." "It's I." The memory rushed back. Frank telling me about a music shop owner drowning in debt and how he'd written a check far beyond what we could afford because he couldn't bear the thought of a vintage guitar shop closing down. "I remember," I said. "What is it, Henry?" Henry sighed, then spoke slowly. "You need to drive to my studio, as soon as possible." "Why?" I frowned. A strange flicker of fear passed through me. Did something happen with Frank's estate? "Because," Henry said, pausing, "I think Frank prepared for this day, before he passed." A cold line of electricity ran down my spine. I didn't ask anything more. "I'll be there within an hour." Arting to. Brooks Vintage Guitars sat on a quiet street, red brick front, its glass door plastered with peeling posters for music shows from over a decade ago. Above it hung a wooden sign, "Brooks Vintage Guitars, since 1983. I pulled the door. The brass bell chimed. The smell hit me all at once: wood, new strings, and time itself. It reminded me of all the trips here with Frank, watching him eye each guitar like a child looking at candy. Henry appeared behind the counter, older than I remembered, hair much grayer, but his eyes still bright and quick. "Joanne." He came around and held my hands. "First of all, I'm so sorry about Frank. I couldn't make the funeral. I was in the hospital then." "I know. It's all right." I shook my head. "Frank knew you cared. That was enough." Henry nodded, then jerked his chin. "Come with me. You need to see this." He led me through a small door into the back office. In the center of the room was a low, felt-covered table. On it sat a red velvet case so familiar it felt like my heart dropped out of my chest. "Henry," I whispered. "Don't tell me." Henry didn't say a word. He simply lifted the lid. The world shrank into a single point. Frank's 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, cherry sunburst, lay there, its glossy body shining, the fretboard freshly polished, the strings new. Every tiny scratch marks I had memorized over years as Frank told stories about this gig or that battle was exactly where it should be. "How?" My voice broke. "How is this guitar here?" Henry gently closed the case and ran his hand along the edge, as if touching something sacred. 3 days ago, he said, I was browsing a site for music gear. A listing caught my eye. Gibson Les Paul, standard $1,959. Cherry Sunburst, $2,500. I thought, no way. But then I scrolled down and saw the serial number, and I nearly fainted. Henry gave a bitter laugh. The exact serial number Frank showed me years ago. He even sent me a picture. My fingers tightened around my purse, palms damp. The seller's name was Mara. From Nashville, Henry added, looking directly at me. Sound familiar? I inhaled sharply. You contacted her? I asked. Immediately, Henry nodded. I called, pretending to be a collector who didn't know much but had cash. She said the guitar belonged to her boyfriend, left to him by his dad, but now the family needed money fast, so she was willing to sell cheap. I closed my eyes. Every word felt like a dull blade dragging across my brain. I knew that price was a crime for a 59, Henry continued. But I didn't negotiate. I just thought, I need to get it back before someone who doesn't know what it is buys it. He looked at the case, then at me. I bought it. She was thrilled, said she'd use the money to pay off credit card debt and take a trip. I brought the guitar back here, and then I started the next step, because Frank told me to. Frank told you? I whispered. Henry walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a thick envelope and a small black USB drive. On the envelope were the words, for Joanne, only open when Henry gives it. I knew the handwriting instantly, the slight right slant, the way he always dragged the tail of the letter G longer than needed. It was Frank's. About 6 months before Frank passed, he came here, Henry said. He brought this envelope and the USB. He told me that if one day I saw anyone try to sell his 1,959 Les Paul, especially if it was your son or his girlfriend, I must buy it back at any cost. It felt like someone had pulled a chair out from underneath me. Frank predicted this? My voice trembled. He didn't predict, Henry said softly. He suspected, and he started investigating. That evening, I sat alone in the living room. The main lights were off, only the small lamp beside the sofa was on. On the table lay the envelope Frank left, the small black USB drive, a blank notebook, Frank's old laptop. The whole house was silent, only the tick of the clock and the faint wind slipping through the window frame broke the stillness. I drew a long breath and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, thicker than I expected, and a stack of printed pages, screenshots of emails, statements, notes. I opened the letter first. Joanne, if you're reading this, it means either everything happened exactly the way I feared, or I'm simply an old man who worried too much. Either way, I want you to have everything I've gathered. I know you'd want to be part of anything I was trying to solve, but I chose to work quietly so I could protect you, at least until I had enough proof. I didn't want you to live in suspicion of every word, every gesture from our son and his girlfriend. From the first time Mara stepped into our house, I felt something off. Some people walk into a room bringing a breeze, others smell like coffee. She walked in carrying calculation. If I had said that aloud, you would have told me I was biased against our son's girlfriend. So I kept quiet. I watched. I took note. I saw the way she asked about our home, whose name was on the deed, whether we still owed the bank, whether we'd considered a nursing home. I saw the way she encouraged Evan to use credit cards, take on payment plans. I've played in hundreds of bars and heard hundreds of stories about young companions who hunted elderly men's assets, and the pieces started to fit. Of course, a feeling isn't proof. So I dug deeper. I asked Ray for help. I found emails, forum posts, and 2 old men. Harold in Florida, Jim in Kentucky. Both told me stories, eerily similar. A young woman, kind, understanding, just trying to help, who eventually vanished with their homes, businesses, and lifetime savings. I can't be 100% sure it was Mara, but the chance that she has a dark enough past to make our home her next victim is very high. I did all this quietly because of you. I didn't want you looking at our son with suspicion every time he brought her over. If I was wrong, you could laugh at me and say I'd grown paranoid. If I was right, at least you'd have a map and a weapon. She won't stop at pushing Evan to use credit cards, travel, and live beyond his means. Eventually, she'll reach for this house and for your financial powers. I'm not sure I have the time to resolve this myself, so I asked Henry to hold the guitar and this envelope. If the Les Paul ever disappears, that's the signal. Her phase 2 has begun. When that happens, I need you to stay calm. Call Henry. Call Ray. Call Harold and Jim. Look the truth in the eye, no matter how painful, because that's the only way you can protect Evan and yourself. I can't protect you forever, but I can leave you a map and a weapon. I love you from the day you walked into that bar wearing that faded denim jacket to the moment I put this pen down. Frank. I set the letter down and covered my face. I cried. Not loudly, not in sobs, just tears hot, steady falling onto the paper. I cried for Frank, the man who always thought further ahead than I did, who prepared even for the days he wouldn't be here. I cried for myself for stubbornly believing Mara is just impulsive, she'll mature. Again. I cried for Evan caught between two worlds. Blind love on one side, and a harsh truth he wasn't ready to face on the other. Finally, I wiped my face, inhaled deeply, and plugged the USB into the laptop. A single folder appeared on the screen. Its name, Mara. Inside were a screenshot of an email. Mara writing to a man named Harold, describing my boyfriend's grumpy old father who loves money more than people. The lines were painfully familiar. He's selfish. He doesn't trust young people. Only I understand him. I had heard almost identical phrases from Mara herself, except she had said them about me and Frank. Another photo. Mara sitting beside an older man in Florida, her hand resting lightly on his, both smiling for the camera. A photo in Kentucky. Mara at a backyard BBQ with a family I didn't recognize, her arm around another older man, looking utterly at home. Frank had highlighted them, adding notes. Is greater than Harold. Lost his house after selling it and investing, based on Mara's advice. Is greater than Jim. Sold his father's garage, money moved into joint fund with Mara, then she vanished. Next were audio files, recordings of Frank's phone calls with them. Ray had helped him record them legally, as evidence. I clicked on one. Harold's trembling voice filled the room. Is greater than, she made me believe my son was just waiting for me to die. She said if I didn't transfer the house, didn't put someone younger on the deed, I'd die alone on my kitchen floor and no one would know. Jim let out a weary laugh. Is greater than, I've spent my whole life in a garage breathing gasoline. Then she walked in like a beam of light, said she'd put my business online, expand branches, handle all the paperwork. The branches never showed up. The only thing that disappeared was my money. End quote. At the bottom of the folder was a note Frank had left. Is greater than, Mara has a pattern. She targets middle-aged or older men who are lonely, have assets, and strained relationships with their families. She uses the same scripts. Your kids don't understand you. You're the only one who truly sees me. The end goal is always the same. Assets, house, accounts. I opened the notebook and started copying everything down. Name plus number. Harold Whitman, Florida. Name plus number. James, Jim, Carter, Kentucky. The timeline of Frank's contact with them. The repeated phrases Mara used. Then I picked up my phone, my hand trembling slightly. First was Harold. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Hello? Hi, Mr. Harold. My name is Joanne Miller, I said. Frank Miller's wife. My husband. He once contacted you about something. About a woman named Mara. There was a few seconds of silence. I've been waiting for this call, he finally said. Frank told me. One day his wife might reach out. My throat tightened. Could you tell me what happened? I asked. My son. He's seeing her. Harold exhaled. The story spilled out halting, but clear. His wife passed away from cancer. His son lives in another state, always busy. He was lonely, so he joined a senior dance class. Mara was there smiling, charming, pretending to fumble so he'd have to guide her. She spoke about a charity to help fathers abandoned by their children and pressed into every bit of guilt he carried. Then she planted seeds. Your son only cares about money. You should sell the house and downsize. Let me help you invest. He doesn't need to know. Kids these days don't understand their parents. Eventually, Harold sold his house. Part of the money went into a joint account with Mara for retirement investments. Then one morning he woke up. The apartment was empty, Mara was gone, and the account was nearly drained. I was stupid, Harold said. But you know, the money and the house weren't the worst part. It was losing my son. He looked at me like I was a traitor. It took us years to speak again, he added softly. Frank heard it all. He said she might already be circling another family. Looks like he was right. I thanked him and promised to call back. Then I dialed Jim. Jim's story was the same script, different setting. He ran a small repair shop his father left him. Mara appeared as a marketing consultant for small family businesses. She urged him to sell the old shop, use the money to open a new modern garage, focus on online customers. Go big at least once in your life. I read him. The money from the sale went into an investment account under both their names. Once the funds landed, Mara vanished, leaving Jim with debt and the reputation of a fool. When Frank called, I almost cried, Jim said. It was the first time someone believed I didn't just hand my savings to a stranger out of stupidity. She knows exactly how to play on a lonely man's heart. I set my phone down. My fingers had gone numb. This wasn't a feeling. This wasn't paranoia. Frank was right. Mara wasn't some reckless woman who overspent. She was a predator. I was still bent over my notebook, eyes tight with focus, when my cell phone rang. Joanne. A deep, warm male voice. It's Ray Donovan, Ray Frank's closest friend. He'd done financial investigations for a major insurance company. They'd met at a bar, then became drinking buddies, then brothers. Frank asked me to look into some things about Mara before he passed, Ray said. I meant to call him that week to report back, but then I heard, I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral. I was out of state on a case. I pressed my lips together. Ray, what did you find? I asked. In short, a lot, Ray sighed. But here's the simple version. 1. Evan's credit card has dozens of charges in places completely outside his usual pattern. Upscale spas, expensive boutiques, resort deposits, plane tickets. 2. Several recent credit card applications under Evan's name, but the signatures, they don't match his original banking records. I compared them. 3. There are anonymous posts on financial forums asking about convincing elderly parents to sell their house to move into luxury senior living, and how adult children can get financial control when parents start to decline. The first 4, writing style is almost identical to Mara's emails to Harold and Jim. Ray paused, giving me room to breathe. Have you noticed, he asked, how lately Mara keeps bringing up things, like all those stairs in your house, what if you fall, or financial power of attorney, or putting the house under joint ownership for safety? I flipped through my notebook. Sure enough, I had written those lines down like tiny needles. Too many stairs in this house. What if you fall, Mom? Mara said as I climbed upstairs to grab a blanket. Have you ever thought about giving me power of attorney? In case one day you forget things, or get tired, it would make everything easier for me, Evan asked, sounding concerned, but I could hear someone else's voice inside his. My friend put her mom on the deed with her, made things so much safer, no paperwork headaches later, Mara said casually, like small talk. Ray spoke again. Mara's building a narrative, that she's the only one who can secure your future. Once that story gets thick enough, any document she slides in front of you won't look suspicious anymore. That's when people sign. I sat still, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Joanne, Frank handed you a weapon, Ray said softly. Now's the time to use it. You're not some helpless old lady. I've seen you handle an entire hospital ward full of stubborn old men. A laugh slipped out of me through tears. You're right. Those men were harder than Frank ever was, I said. Here's what we'll do, Ray continued. First, you talk to Evan. Give him the choice. Call Harold and Jim, or trust Mara blindly. Only he can pull the curtain off his own eyes. Don't expect Mara to reveal herself unless she's cornered. As for me, he added, I'll keep monitoring the account and credit activity. If she plans to leave the way she did with those 2 men, we'll know. I took a long breath. All right, I said. It's time I stopped fearing my son's anger and started fearing for his future instead. I called Evan. Are you free this weekend? I'm making beef stew the way your dad liked it. I want you and Mara to come over. Evan brightened immediately. Oh man, it's been forever since I had that. I'll be there. Mara loves your stew too. I closed my eyes at the sting of the words, Mara loves. Saturday night, I prepared as if for something ceremonial. Beef simmered low for nearly 3 hours with carrots, potatoes, celery, bay leaves, garlic toast. An apple pie with slightly burnt edges, Frank always said, a little burnt makes it better. I also brought out the nicest dinnerware the set Frank used to grumble about. Save that for a truly special occasion. He never imagined that special would mean the night his wife set a trap for their son's girlfriend. When Evan and Mara arrived, the moment the door opened, the smell of stew rushed into the hallway. Oh my God, I missed this smell, Evan said, wrapping his arms around me. For a second, he was again that 10-year-old boy jumping up at the words, stew for dinner. Mara followed behind him, smiling brightly. Aunt Joanne, your house always smells incredible. I brought you this. She handed me a small box tied with a ribbon. Perfume from duty-free on our last trip. I thought the scent would suit you. Thank you, I said, setting it aside. Come, eat stew gets worse when it cools. We sat down. For the first 20 minutes, everything unfolded, almost like an ordinary family dinner. Evan talked about new projects at his design firm. Mara told stories about demanding clients in the hospitality industry she was doing marketing for. Now and then, Frank's name came up, something he'd said about music, and all three of us would go quiet. When dessert came, I set the warm apple pie on the table. Mara speared a slice, took a bite, closed her eyes, and smiled. It's delicious. I get why Frank loved this. She put her fork down, letting her gaze drift around the house, as if noticing the place for the first time. This house is pretty big for just you, she said, her tone soft, contemplative. If it were me, I think I'd be scared. I sipped my tea. I was, at first, I said, but now I'm used to it. Every corner smells like Frank. If I moved away, I'd feel lost. Mara gave a small, understanding smile. I get that, she nodded. But have you ever thought about the longer future? I mean, health, paperwork? At your age, a lot of my friends' parents already have to consider retirement homes or putting the house in joint ownership with their kids so things aren't chaotic later. Evan stiffened a little, glancing at her, surprised she went straight for it. We've talked about it, a bit, Mara continued, turning to Evan as if seeking his support. Evan's really worried about you. He said that if one day you fell down the stairs or had to go to the hospital suddenly and everything accounts, property is only in your name, it would be difficult. Evan cleared his throat. I only asked if you'd ever thought about giving me power of attorney, he said. So later, if you get tired, I can help handle the paperwork. I set my fork down, dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin, and looked at both of them. I appreciate that you two care about me, I said gently. But I have one small question. Who brought this topic up to my son first? Mara jumped in immediately. What do you mean, Aunt Joanne? I have very too. I lived with Evan for more than 20 years, I said, looking straight at him. Not once did he ever think about power of attorney or joint ownership. He only started talking about these things after he started dating you. The table fell silent for a few seconds. Mara broke first, laughing lightly. Aunt Joanne, now you're making me feel misunderstood, she said, smiling. I just hear so many stories from guests at work. Families fall apart because they don't prepare. I just don't want that to happen to you. Evan murmured. Mom, don't overthink it. I'm just planning ahead. I have to destroy her. I smiled, the kind of smile people who've cared for Alzheimer's patients use when a patient says, I didn't hide my pills. Good, I said. Planning ahead is good. Your father planned ahead too, so much so that he prepared for this exact day. I saw Mara pause. Her lashes fluttered fast, calculating how much I knew. I didn't say another word. Dinner ended under a strained, brittle quiet. Before they left, Mara hugged me. I'm sorry if bringing up the house made you uncomfortable, she whispered. I really do want what's best for you. I patted her gently on the back. Oh, I believe, I said softly. I believe you want what's best for someone. The only question is, who? End quote. Mara stepped back, still smiling, but the corners of her mouth had stiffened. I watched them walk to the car. Under the faded yellow streetlight, Evan opened the car door for her, attentive, like the perfect gentleman he'd always tried to be. I told myself, tomorrow has to come. The next day, I called Evan. Can you stop by this afternoon? I asked. Just you. I need help moving a few heavy things in the garage. Evan paused. Mara, we don't keep things from each other, he said. I don't want you thinking we're taking sides. Then tell her I need you to lift some boxes, I replied. If she has a problem with you helping your mother for one afternoon, then we already have our answer. Evan sighed. Okay, I'll come. I laid all the weapons out on the kitchen table. Frank's handwritten letter, printed emails, screenshots, statements, notes about Harold and Jim. My own jotted observations. When Evan walked in, he frowned at the pile. If this is about Mara again, he said, his voice tightening. No, I said. First, it's about your father. I handed him Frank's letter. Read. Evan leaned against the counter, unfolded the letter, and began reading. After the first few lines, his face drained. By the section where Frank described a predator who targets the elderly, Evan's hands were visibly shaking. Dad investigated Mara. For 18 months? Evan said, barely breathing. Your father observed and gathered information, I said. He wasn't lurking in the shadows. He wanted to be sure before he ever said anything to you. And you believed him? Evan looked up. You never liked Mara. You thought she took your son away. Now you have evidence. And suddenly you're ready to believe anything bad about her. I don't need to believe everything bad, I said quietly, pulling the documents toward us. I just need to believe what happened to Harold and Jim, too. I slid the photos and printed emails toward him. This is Harold, I said, pointing. This is Jim. Call them. Ask them if the woman in these photos looks like the woman you're building a life with. Evan stared at the picture of Mara standing beside Harold at a party, her hand placed on his shoulder, her smile syrup-sweet. This could be anybody, Evan insisted. Photoshop is so easy now. Then call them, I repeated, placing the 2 sheets with phone numbers in front of him. If this is all a misunderstanding, if this is a lie, then you'll have every reason in the world to love and protect Mara for the rest of your life and to never doubt her again. It's not about. Evan suddenly burst, slamming his hand against the table. You always want to tear us apart, he shouted. You can't handle the fact that I love someone as much as I love you. I let him breathe. Let the anger drain through his shoulders. No, I said slowly. I'm not afraid of you loving someone else. I'm afraid of you loving the wrong person. And I am even more afraid of you trading your future for an illusion. He turned away, staring out the window, shoulders trembling. I'm not calling anyone, he said. I know Mara. She's not like that. Dad was wrong because he was paranoid. You're wrong because you're biased. I don't want to be like either of you. End quote. To Cater. Then live with that choice, I said, knowing I was playing my last card. But remember this. If one day you lose your house, your name, your dignity over signatures you thought were for love, you will not be able to say, I didn't give you a chance to see the truth. I gathered the documents and slid them back into the folder. The door is always open, Evan, I said. For you. But not necessarily. For Mara. Evan stood there a long time, then walked to the door. As his hand wrapped around the handle, he said, so softly I almost missed it. I already lost Dad. Don't make me lose you too. The door closed. My legs nearly gave out. I had to grab a chair to steady myself. That night, I kept my phone beside me. The screen lit up and went dark again, over and over, until nearly midnight. Then it vibrated. Mom. Evan's voice cracked. I called Harold, Evan said, his voice raw. And Jim, they told the same story, just different streets, different shops, different amounts. Everything else was identical. He inhaled shakily. I asked them what the woman sounded like, how she laughed, the things she'd say. They repeated the exact lines I'd heard Mara use with me about you and Dad. I stayed quiet and let him speak. When I got home, Mara was watching a movie, Evan said. I turned off the TV. She said, "What are you doing?" "It's the best part." And I said, "I know about Harold Whitman, about Jim Carter, and about Dad investigating you." "What did she do?" I asked. "That switch." Evan gave a bitter laugh. It wasn't a movie, but it was clearer than any movie. Her smiling face just shut off. Like someone flipped a switch. She leaned back on the couch, crossed her arms, he continued, and said, "How long did it take you to call them? I thought you were smarter than that." She didn't deny it, didn't cry, didn't ask, "Why don't you trust me?" She just blamed me for being stupid. "And then?" I asked. I asked her about the signatures on the new credit cards under my name, about the emails with Harold and Jim, about what she said to them. She smirked and said, "If that's what they told you, then sure. Lonely old men with money and no one touching them. Don't you think they'd make up stories just to feel important?" Evan swallowed. When I asked, "What about my dad? Was he a lonely old man too?" She slammed her glass onto the table and yelled, "Your father stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Who did he think he was to judge my life?" I told her to pack her things. She said, "So it's me or your toxic family?" And I said, "I choose the truth." I heard him laugh, but there was no joy in it. She packed fast, Evan said. 15 minutes later, her suitcase was at the door. She looked back and said, "You'll miss me. Without me, you're nothing." Frank had predicted that exact line in his letter. I closed my eyes and thanked him silently. I thought, "That was it," Evan said. "But I'm guessing I'm wrong, right? With someone like her, finished just means she's moving on to the next target." "Right," I said softly. "And we're not going to let the next target walk in blind the way you almost did." The next morning, Ray called just as dawn was breaking. "I've been monitoring Mara's card activity," he said. "Last night, there were 3 large cash withdrawals at 3 different ATMs, over 40 grand in total. And this morning, the card was used to buy a one-way ticket to Toronto, departing at 7 a.m., out of Nashville." I checked the clock. 5:10. "Joanne, do you want this to truly end? Or just break up?" Ray asked. "Truly end," I said. "But how?" "Call Evan," Ray said. "Tell him to bring every document tied to the cards in his name that he didn't sign, the statements, the pages from Frank's letter about Harold and Jim. I'll alert airport security and some contacts in financial crimes. If we're lucky, she hasn't gone through TSA yet." I didn't question it was time to act. Evan picked up on the first ring. "I'm awake," he said. "I couldn't sleep." "Mara's trying to leave Nashville," I said plainly. "This is your chance not just to save yourself, but to help people like Harold and Jim. Are you coming?" A pause. Then, "If I don't go," Evan said quietly, "I'll spend the rest of my life feeling like an accomplice." "I'm coming." We met in the airport parking garage. Ray stood waiting, wearing an old jacket, holding a stack of papers. "These are confirmations from the bank showing the non-matching signatures on the card applications," he said, handing them to Evan. "And the summary of her transactions from last night. It's Noverside." Evan nodded, clutching the folder so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She's at the check-in counter over there," Ray said. Not far away, Mara stood in line with 2 large suitcases, wearing a cream trench coat, her hair neatly twisted into a bun. She smiled at the agent, handed over her passport, said something that made the agent laugh. From a distance, if you didn't know better, she looked like a confident young woman heading out for a business trip or a stylish vacation. Evan squeezed my hand. "I never thought I'd see her like this," he whispered. "That's why she's dangerous," Ray said. "When villains look like villains, no one falls for them." We kept our distance. A moment later, 2 plainclothes men with security badges approached her. They said something quietly. Mara blinked, surprised, but kept smiling, nodding, and rolled her suitcases to follow them into a private screening area. "Let's go," Ray said. We were led into an observation room behind a one-way glass wall. From here, we could see the baggage inspection area clearly, while no one outside could see us. Mara placed her suitcase on the table. One security officer opened the first case. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics. Normal. The second suitcase. I heard Evan suck in a sharp breath. Inside were bundles of cash, thick and neatly banded, stuffed into every corner. Beside them was an envelope filled with documents. A passport under a different name, several contracts, and multiple power of attorney forms, all bearing the same forged signature, Evan Miller, repeated over and over. The officer looked at Mara. "Can you explain this amount of cash?" he asked. Mara smiled, trying to steady her voice. "I work for a company. My boss asked me to bring the money to Canada for a real estate investment," she said. "And the documents," Those are company files. My boyfriend signed on my behalf. Your boyfriend? Is Evan Miller? The officer asked. We've spoken with him. Mara snapped her head around. Her eyes searched and then landed on Evan behind the one-way glass. For a split second, every layer of psychological makeup peeled off. Her face drained white, then flushed deep red with rage. You, she mouthed. I couldn't hear her, but I knew. Security continued examining her luggage. They opened the envelope, flipped through each paper, scribbled notes. Another officer entered, carrying handcuffs. I'm afraid we need you to come with us for further questioning, he said. There are indications of financial fraud, forged documents, and money laundering. Mara jerked away, trying to back up. You have no right, she screamed. That's my money. He gave it to me. He loves me. She pointed at Evan, tears spilling this time murky, like dishwater, not clear. Ray tapped lightly on the glass, signaling the staff outside. They nodded and directed us to the next room. A moment later, the door opened. Mara, her wrists now cuffed, was escorted down the hall. As she passed, she glared at Evan. Without me, you're nothing, she spat. I showed you real life. Your mother just clings to those stupid old guitars in that house that reeks of the past. I looked at her calmly. You're wrong, Mara, I said. This house smells like stew and apple pie, and the sweat of a man who worked his whole life for his family, and the scent of guitar strings you never could understand. She scoffed and turned away. Evan collapsed onto a chair, burying his face in his hands. I was so stupid, Mom, he choked. God, I was so stupid. I placed my hand on his shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. No, I whispered. You just loved the wrong person. What matters now is learning how to love the right way. The weeks that followed were long stretches of meetings with lawyers, police, and investigators. Ray became the bridge between us and the tangled legal system. He translated every term into human language for me. Financial fraud, identity theft, forged documents, mandatory financial rehabilitation, restitution to victims. Mara was charged with a list of crimes. The media gave her flashier nicknames: the financial black widow, the elder asset hunter, the credit card phantom. I tried not to read the news. Every time I saw her face, my blood boiled, yet some small part of me felt pity. Not for her, but for all the other Evans out there. Young men and women who trust too easily, who get manipulated before they even realize it. Evan was removed from the list of suspects. He was a victim signing documents under deception, and the first to come forward with evidence, testifying at the preliminary hearing. His condition: he had to attend long-term counseling and a financial literacy program for young adults. I deserve that, Evan said, holding his first counseling appointment slip. Not because the law says so, but because I need it. I nodded. You don't deserve to be deceived, I said. But you do deserve a chance to understand yourself, so no one can lead you by the hand like that again. One afternoon, he showed up at my door with 2 suitcases. Mom, he hesitated. Can I stay here for a while? The apartment has too many memories of Mara. I'm not ready to be there alone. This house has always been yours, I said without hesitation. He smiled a soft, sheepish smile and rolled the suitcases into his old room. That night, I heard him turning in bed, the floorboards creaking. I remembered the nights he was small, waking from nightmares and running to our room. Now he didn't run, but his quiet sigh drifting down the hallway told me he still couldn't sleep. One day, he sat in the kitchen holding the old workbook Frank used to teach him guitar. The pages were yellowed around the edges, but Frank's handwriting remained bold. Dad wrote down every time he adjusted the strings, every scratch on that Les Paul, Evan said, voice thick. There's even an entry: taught Evan his first chord today. Clumsy kid, but his eyes lit up like stage lights. He exhaled shakily. You sold your father's second heart for a vacation and a couple of overdue bills, he said. Aren't you angry at me? I looked at my son and, for a moment, saw the little boy he used to be, the one who scraped his knee falling off his bike, crying and furious at himself. I was angry, I said honestly. Angry enough to want to cut ties, but then I remembered I'm the only adult left in this house. So I had to act like an adult, not like a child who just lost a toy. Evan let out a broken laugh through his tears. You always say something that Makes me want to cry and laugh at the same time, he said. I shrugged. That's motherhood, I replied. It's my only real talent, standing in the middle of two emotions at once. One afternoon, while I was sorting through old boxes in the garage, my phone rang. Joanne, you home? Henry's voice. I'm in the garage, I said. What's going on? Come out to the porch, he chuckled. I brought you something. I called for Evan, and he followed me outside. Curious. A small truck pulled up. Henry stepped out, walked to the back, and opened the doors. Inside, resting in the center of the cargo space, was a red velvet case, and the moment I saw it, my heart hammered. No, Henry, you... I stammered. The guitar, don't tell me. Henry lifted the case, as if carrying a newborn. Frank paid his debt to me long ago, he said. My shop, my whole life. I owe to him. The $2,500 I spent to buy the guitar back was just my way of settling a small part of what I owe. The real part is bringing his second heart home. I plan to pay you back, I whispered, my eyes burning. Henry shook his head. $2,500 is the cheapest lesson on friendship I've ever paid for, he smiled. And this guitar belongs to your family. He turned to Evan and held the case out. You're Frank's son, he said. It's time you carry it into the music room yourself. Evan took the case, his hands trembling. He looked at me for permission. I nodded. We walked into the music room. The smell of wood, varnish, and old strings wrapped around us. Afternoon light came through the window, dusting the guitars on the wall in gold. Evan set the case on the table and opened it. Light hit the cherry sunburst body, and it glowed. Welcome home, I whispered, unsure if I was speaking to the guitar or to Frank. Henry stood in the doorway, leaning on the frame, his eyes warm with both joy and grief. That night, after Henry left, Evan sat in Frank's old chair, settling the Les Paul across his lap. He held the pick, his hand unsteady. I'm going to start over, he said. Not to be a rocker, not to play on a stage. Just so, every time I touch it, I remember what I'm responsible for. I sat in the old recliner, listening to his first attempts. A buzzing G, a D missing a string, an M played on the wrong fret. Each mistake made him wince, then laugh at himself, and I laughed too. The house rang with music again, not Frank's masterful tone, but something honest in its own way. Mara's case dragged on for nearly a year. In that time, our lives slowly found a new rhythm. I joined a support group for families of financial fraud victims. I met people like me, lonely, ashamed, angry at the victims, angry at the perpetrators, angry at themselves. Evan went to therapy regularly. Sometimes he'd come home saying, "The therapist says I'm not just hurt because she fooled me. I'm hurt because I realized I looked down on you and Dad. I have to forgive myself before I expect you to forgive me." I joked, is greater than, "I forgave you the moment you cried because you realized you were stupid, not just because someone tricked you well." Is dialing. One day, Evan texted me from a cafe, is greater than, "Mom, there's a woman here. Brunette. Smiles kind of like Mara." My chest tightened, not from missing her, just fear. I replied, is greater than good. For a while, your heart needs to be scared of smiles that look too perfect. He sent back a half-crying emoji. Each month we got updates from the lawyer. More victims identified, more evidence collected, more charges added. One day, 2 envelopes arrived. One from Harold, standing in front of his new apartment, smaller than his old house, but with a proud look in his eyes. One from Jim, showing his new repair shop, smaller than his father's old garage, but with a sign reading, "Rebuilt and stronger." Well, both men thanked me, but I knew they were really thanking Frank for what he'd started. I used part of Frank's savings, the fund he once called our retirement road trip money, to help them. It felt like Frank was still walking alongside them. The rest, I kept for myself. Short trips to country music towns Frank once dreamed of, basic guitar classes for seniors, and quiet nights in small bars, listening to young musicians play the songs of our generation. The first anniversary of Frank's passing arrived. That morning, Nashville was cool, the sun still gold, the wind shaking the leaves in the yard. I placed a vase of flowers on the small memorial shelf where I kept his photo, his old guitar pick, and the last family picture we took together. Evan came out of his room, the Les Paul in his arms. I think Dad would like hearing Blue Moon of Kentucky from this guitar today, he said, trying to smile. I nodded and sat in Frank's morning coffee spot near the window. Evan plugged into the old amp, adjusted a few knobs, and strummed. The Les Paul bloomed with warm, round sound, as if those 13 empty months had never happened. He started playing. It wasn't perfect. There were off notes, rushed bars, trembling fingers. But somewhere in the imperfections, I heard Frank. In the way Evan closed his eyes during the chorus, in the way his fingers muted a string that rang too long, in that bit of soul only people who've hurt and healed can play. When the song ended, Evan let out a breath and looked at Frank's photo. Dad, he whispered, I don't know if you forgive me, but I promise from today on, I'll be the man who stands at this door, not the man who opens the safe. I stepped beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. Don't turn yourself into a guard, I said. Be a companion. Your dad wanted you to play music with him, not stand guard over a safe. Evan smiled, eyes wet. I'll try, he said. That night, after the house quieted, I went into the music room alone. The soft lamplight glowed over the guitars, the 59 Les Paul in the center, the room's beating heart. I placed my hand on the neck and whispered, Do you see this, Frank? I'm still here. Evan's still here. And your second heart is still beating. In that moment, I didn't feel like I was talking to someone gone. I was just talking to my husband like I had 1,000 times before. Maybe he couldn't hear me. Or maybe he was somewhere above, on an invisible stage, strumming a few chords, smiling because his family finally found its rhythm again. If you, whoever is reading or listening, have stayed with me from the moment that safe was cracked open, the Les Paul disappeared, and then found its way home, I want to ask you something. If it were you, could you forgive a child who sold the second heart of the person you loved most? I don't have a right or wrong answer. I only know this. I chose to forgive, not because my son deserved forgiveness, but because he deserved a chance to make things right, and because my husband gave me enough wisdom to know the real person who deserved punishment wasn't the boy who once dreamed of wearing his father's Les Paul on stage. And you? What would you do if your child sold the second heart of the person you loved most?